Hello everybody, long time no see. I have been absolutely terrified to make another YouTube video and I've been really procrastinating it. Reason being, I consume a lot of YouTube videos myself at the moment and I've kind of got it into my head that the next video I create has to be perfect and extremely edited, and I've got to make it really good, and that's making me way too anxious to actually sit down and make a video. But here I am being brave, and I do apologise for my total lack of posting videos. So here I am, getting over my fear, and I'm making a YouTube video for you today about growing up with autism and what that was like for me and why it was like that for me. So for some background info on me, I was diagnosed with autism only when I was just 17, so not actually that long ago. But I have been diagnosed with OCD since I was 13, and when I was a child, my primary experience of childhood was through OCD, extreme OCD and autism. So let's get into what that looked like for me. So I never actually went to nursery. I had a childminder and she looked after me from when I was 2 months old to when I was 11. So she'd pick me up from school when I did start school, but I didn't go to nursery, I stayed with her. And so when I started in reception, that was quite a big change for me, I suppose, but I seem to have handled it well from what I hear from my parents. And I think I settled in all right into reception. I had some friends, I liked to play in the sandpit, and from the get-go I loved to read and I like to tell stories, and I like to play. Now, playing for me when I was younger was quite different, I think. It wasn't so imaginative, although I do have a huge imagination, I always have. I think the way I've always liked to play is structured and regulatory. So I think that caused some issues for me when I was very young, because when you're playing with a bunch of 4 and 5-year-olds, they don't want to follow Amber's specific rules and they don't want Amber to direct the game exactly to her liking. So I think I probably had a bit of beef in reception, but I can't remember that. I do remember starting to struggle with my OCD perhaps in year 2, because reception in year 1 I was okay, I can't really remember much. Year 2 I remember this moment in assembly, and maybe this needs a trigger warning, it's actually quite upsetting, but I remember picking the skin off my body. Like in assembly I just started picking all the skin off my body. I had this compulsion that I had to do it, and it was pretty bad actually. I had to go home, we had to have a meeting with my parents in the school. They were like, what is this little girl doing? So that was perhaps the first time I think back to, and I think, when did I start struggling with my OCD? But at that time I don't think I was struggling too much with anything that I'd linked to autism. I was obviously different, like how I said about playing in groups of children, and there's lots of pictures of me as a child with loads of Playmobil in lines, which is just how I like to play. I like to line them all up and then make them do things, and I used to fight with my sister quite a lot because she always used to mess up my lines. So yeah, and then I think, but certainly through all of primary school, year 1, year 2, reception, all the way to year 6, growing up, I was very smart. I was particularly good at writing, and I wrote a really long story in year 2, I think, that my teacher made me bring to the head teacher because she said it was amazing, and I really liked to think about things. And yeah, I think also another thing that stands out to me now is when I was particularly young, 5, 6, 7, I refused to wear denim. I hated the texture of it. My mum would be constantly buying me jeans and she'd go, Amber, try this on, and I'd literally scream. Like, you would not catch me dead wearing denim. I hated the feeling of it. I grew up very picky eater. I said I'm quite a picky eater, but there were so many things that I hated. I did not like vegetables very much. The textures really threw me. I remember my dad would often buy sausages, and if there was a little bit of fat that I couldn't chew, I'd be fuming. And all my dinners, I would put them in a plate well, my dad would put them in the plate because I'd be about 6 years old, get them put in a plate, and then I'd mash up all the food into this big pie. And you probably think, you'd look at it and you think that's absolutely disgusting, but that is how I like to eat my food, and that was peak. That was the best way to eat my food. So in year 3, I think I really am trying to place it. It was quite a long time ago, but I just remember having a friend group. I had some friends, and then there were a lot of people that thought I was really strange and didn't like me, and I didn't really understand why. I still honestly don't really understand why. I think it's probably just that I was autistic and maybe I looked different, and also it's, I'm sure, to do with the people that were bullying me, but they were really nasty to me. And it started later in primary school, and they'd say really horrible things about my parents, say really horrible things about my teeth, they say really horrible things about my clothes, and they were just really, really nasty. And once one of them slapped me, that was later, I think that was just when I was leaving, I was quite a bit older then. And that made primary school really, really difficult for me. I didn't enjoy it. I remember once my mum bought me a coat. I must have been 8 or 9. She bought me this blue coat and I thought it was really cool, and I wore it into primary school. And one of the guys that bullied me, he said that I looked like I was wearing a bin bag, and that made sense because I was trash. I still vividly remember the words he used, which I suppose it stuck with me. And I at the same time, though, it's kind of strange, I did have friends. I had quite a few friends, and I do also remember having a conversation with my friend, because I'm just remembering now, she was friends with one of my bullies, and I said, can you stop being friends with him? And she said, no, he's nice to me, he's not mean to me. And that made me really angry, because that ties into another thing that was going on for me in primary school. I had a huge sense of justice, and I still do, but when things were unfair, I'd snitch. I was always snitching. That was probably also not good for my likability, but that was also pretty bad in the later part of primary school. I just snitched on people when they were doing things that weren't fair, cheating in tests, everything. Cheating in running, trust me, I'd be snitching. And I think perhaps that's also when my OCD started to get really bad. I'm not sure if that's because I was being bullied, but I kind of turned to lots of different rituals. This is a video about autism. I can make one about growing up with OCD because that's a whole different ball game. But that also made things quite difficult in terms of fitting in. Like, it didn't help at all. And yeah, I didn't particularly enjoy year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6. I did snitch on my bullies in year 5, and I was actually told, oh, they probably have a crush on you, which is not necessarily something I wanted to hear. But I remember my head teacher having a big talk with all of the boys that bullied me. I think it was 4 or 5 of them, and they all came back crying, and that made me feel really awful. I was in year 5. I thought, oh my gosh, like, this is my fault. They will come back crying because they're being targeted for bullying me. And that also ties into another childhood trait and current trait of mine, which is intense empathy, I suppose. I've always been quite empathetic, especially towards people that are not nice to me, which is not necessarily a good thing. But yeah, I remember that, and one of the boys eventually got expelled because he was just he was bullying me, but he was doing all sorts of other things as well. He wasn't a very nice boy, which I think he had a lot going on at home, but my mum always said that to me. My mum always said, Amber, he's got a lot going on at home, that's why he's mean to you, which didn't really make sense to me at the time, but it makes a bit more sense now. But I think with the bullying, that was kind of overt, and I could see it and I could feel it, and something I found more difficult, especially when I was older, like 10, 11, and now it's followed me through like my teenage years, is being excluded, and that made me really upset. when, you know, a group of girls in my class would be having a conversation and you'd go over and they'd stop talking and I wasn't allowed to know what they were talking about, and I'd say, please can you tell me, I want to know, and they'd go, no, you're not allowed to know. Or when they're playing a game with 4 people and you say, can I play, and they say, no, it's only for 5 people, or, you know, stuff like that. And I think that definitely follows you into adulthood more so than bullying, overt bullying, because I still find myself excluded from social situations quite a lot, but I kind of can process that now. But when I was in primary school, that made me so incredibly upset. I'd be really upset when I'd be excluded from these groups, because I'd always just wanted to be included, and I didn't like secrets at all. I didn't think they were fair, and I was excluded quite a lot by the girls in my year through primary school, and also through swimming. When I was swimming at that age too quite a lot, especially in year 5 and year 6, and the girls in my swimming team, they didn't really like me either, and they were always talking without me and I wasn't allowed to know what they were talking about, and that is actually, I think I found that harder than being bullied, to be honest, because these were people I wanted to like me. I didn't really care if the people that were bullying me liked me. And I think I relied quite a lot on my dad growing up to talk to him. I talked to him a lot about a lot of things that were going on with me and all these things that I was thinking about. But at the same time, my parents were not really there all the time when I was growing up, because my mum is a professional musician, and my dad, he's director of something at Sky TV. Sky, it's not TV anymore, it's just Sky. But he's always been busy, my mum's always been really busy. So, like I said, I spent a lot of time with my childminder, more than my parents, especially during the week. So I think maybe I was kind of processing a lot of that in my own head, on my own, rather than speaking about it with my parents. I'm not sure whether that's a bad thing or a good thing. You might think that's a bad thing, but I think it's given me a lot of skills in critical thinking about myself and how I think about myself, and self-confidence, I suppose. I've always been quite good at resolving, I've not actually, but I'm okay at resolving issues on my own. I don't know if it comes from that. But I did have quite a close relationship with my dad growing up, I think because he was around more than my mum. And yeah. I also just want to talk about my snuggle, because I have 3 of these. So I have 2 that look like this, and they have this little bit on the end that goes really cold, and then I have another fluffy one on my bed. But growing up and now, I took my snuggles everywhere. I used to take them to school, and they're baby grows that I slept in when I was a baby, obviously, and then when I grew out of them, I still kept sleeping with them, but kind of as a blanket, and I started putting them at my feet just as like a sensory thing, and it would really help me sleep. And when I was like going somewhere new or doing something difficult, that snuggle would always come with me. Once we left it in Paris, I think, and we had to go back and get it because there was just no way I was going without it. And I've still got all 3, and now I'm 19. So, and I sleep with them every night. So I think that kind of, yeah, that's another thing that's like always been consistent. And I suppose now I'm thinking more generally, what did I actually like to do when I was a child with autism? And what I've spoken about, these interests I had, like swimming and music, I guess, but I definitely had some special interests. So I was obsessed with medieval torture. I used to drag my dad to the London dungeons. Like, we'd been there a lot, and every time we'd go on a family holiday when I was 8 or 9, or younger than that actually, I'd always beg my parents to take me to a prison museum or castle dungeon, and I love looking at the racks and all the like chain and the ball. That was just my favourite thing. I had books about medieval torture and medieval dungeons, and then Victorian torture and punishment, and that was just, I don't know, I just loved, I just really enjoyed learning about that. I also had, I think this is just because I like to swim, but I really liked water parks. I've always loved going to water parks, and I'd get really invested in watching YouTube videos on water parks when I was like 10, 11, 9. I just used to spend ages watching videos of people going down water slides. I'm trying to think what other things. Obviously, I like to read. I've always liked to read, and I've always been. I mean, I've kind of fallen off that now. I need to start reading again. But I grew up reading a lot of books. And I think I was very busy as a child. I did my grade 7 flute, and I played the piano as well. So I guess I didn't have that much time to develop huge interest in things. But, well, I did, because my interest in medieval torture and dungeons was insane. I also loved The Next Step, actually. That's another thing. I was obsessed with The Next Step. That was like my favourite thing in the world. I even watched the spin-off of The Next Step, which nobody knows when I talk about it, but it was like they let UK young dancers audition, and then the people that won would get to be in one episode of The Next Step, and I watched all of that as well. Like, you cannot be a bigger fan of The Next Step than me. And then kind of, I mean, this is just about my early youth, but when I got through my teens, which I don't really count as, obviously it's growing up, but in my head that's not the same thing. But then I developed more typical autism interests, like musicals. I did go to see Matilda when I was like 8, and it was the best thing ever. It was actually the best day of my life, genuinely. I was like, Matilda, you're me, and I just cried so much that day. And then I did listen to the Matilda soundtrack all the time on my dad's iPad. So actually I loved Matilda. I also loved Thumbelina. That was another one of my favourite films. But I was never big into princesses or anything like that, but I love Matilda. I still love Matilda, clearly. Yeah, I'm trying to think what a good note to end on is, but this video has actually made me really happy. I feel like I've expressed myself how I wanted to, and I don't know if I'm going to edit it, so stay tuned. Well, you don't need to stay tuned, I just need to make that decision myself. But I'm wondering what else my like youth, my very young years look like with autism. I feel like that's kind of the gist of it. It's just that it wasn't terrible, but it definitely changed things, and I think that it made a lot of difference to my total mental breakdown in year 9, which is a story for another day. That I was probably actually under a lot of stress for quite a long time, burning out, and I also just didn't know why, because obviously no one had even mentioned autism to me or my parents, or nobody, like, it was never really thought of, so I didn't know why things were like that, and I didn't know why I was different. But yeah, definitely had a different experience, I think, to lots of people, and I do wish I was diagnosed earlier. I think it would have helped a lot and things would have been easier. But I think looking back and saying I wish I was diagnosed earlier and getting frustrated about that doesn't help at all, because I am who I am what I am, and I've been through that sequence of events, and it's led me to where I am, and where I am is not a terrible place. So yeah, thanks for watching.